Funding was provided by the Kansas Humanities Council, a nonprofit organization that connects communities with history, traditions, and ideas to strengthen civic life. In 1905, Otto Kratzer moved to Volland, Kansas, joining his older brother Bill, who purchased a house and opened a store in the fledgling railroad town. And it was there that Otto developed a passion for photography.
Bill Kratzer had the first camera here in the area, but I'll tell you it was more like glass plates, as it was explained to me. Then Otto came along, and my grandpa, George Thier, they formed a photography club. And they didn't really have a fancy name, it's just they got together to buy photography supplies. And they would swap equipment, swap techniques. It was all done what we would today call self-training. You tried something, it didn't work, and you kind of shared it among your friends what to try and not to do.
Otto's fascination with photography soon became an obsession with the recording of history. For a half century, Otto took thousands of photographs documenting daily life at Volland. Aside from the sheer numbers, Kratzer exhibited an extraordinary talent for composition and knowing exactly when to snap the shutter. Around 1950, Otto's interests expanded from still photography to include making films with his newly purchased 8mm movie camera. So in 1955, when the U.S. Post Office notified Postmaster Otto F. Kratzer that the post office located in his general store would close for good on the last day of October, Otto, the filmmaker, documented the movement of the mail in and out of Volland.
The railroad had a hook where Otto would take down the mail bag, and it was a cloth bag, and there was a hook on the side of the railroad track that he'd hang that hook. And the railroad would go by and somebody in there had a hook or something, and they grabbed that bag, and then the bag, they threw it for Volland here. And so Otto, after he hung it up, why then, he always made us come back to the store and wait until the train is by, because that bag could kill a person if it hit them in the head.
Through the film that he shot, Otto documented the rest of the process. The bag being retrieved trackside by his son Waldo, and then carried up to the store. Otto emptying the bag of its mail so that it could be sorted for the patrons of the Volland post office. The outbound first-class mail being hand-canceled by Otto and being placed into canvas bags to be hung for various trains traveling through Volland in both directions. He carefully documented all facets of his job as postmaster, providing a clear record of its history on film. In 1955, when the post office closed and this film was shot, Otto was 69 years old. Retirement as postmaster did not come with joy for Otto. As his last act as postmaster, before closing that last mailbag for the last time, Otto, with a never-ending eye for history, prepared this postcard, addressed to his 1-year-old granddaughter. He wrote, "Dear Karen, as I am getting too old for the hard work, and besides, Uncle Sam will stop my pay after today, so I guess I will shut down my post office and retire. So after today, my address will be, instead of Otto F. Kratzer, Postmaster, Volland, Kansas, just plain old Otto, without the F. Route 3, Alma, Kansas. Signed, Otto F. Kratzer, Postmaster." And with those words, the Volland post office closed for the very last time. When the Rock Island Railroad built its tracks through Kansas, the leading commodity the trains carried in the Flint Hills was cattle. With the arrival of the railroads, the days of the long cattle drives to distant railheads came to an end. Having nearby stockyards and rail service provided an easier method of getting the local ranchers' livestock to market. The rails also made it possible to bring tens of thousands of so-called Texas cattle into the area from southern states. These cattle were sent to the Flint Hills for summer pasture before being shipped on to markets in Kansas City and beyond. At Volland, the Kratzer stores were located next to the stockyards, and the store did considerable business with cattlemen. When the cowboys were shipping cattle, it was a busy time in Volland.
The main point of interest when I was a kid growing up was the stockyards. Of course, our family dealt in cattle, and clear up until 1961, we used a railroad to ship cattle. I think the last time I helped, we'd gotten 1,000 head in on 22 cars for grazing purposes, and they went out on 28 cars.
The cattle business was the largest industry in Washington Township, and the stockyards were an integral part of marketing cattle.
That was the only reason for missing church on Sunday morning, was to ship cattle. And when Grandpa said ship cattle, we shipped cattle. When we got there, we had to round up all of these cattle. And when we got them all rounded up and on the road, I think they were strung clear to the back to the top of the hills, probably about 2 miles. So our plan was, and my Grandpa Gus was always in the lead, and it's hard to gather my thoughts and not think about everything that's tied to this. I'll try and keep it brief. But anyway, he was always in the lead, and my Uncle Art and my dad Bill, they would take about 15, 20 head of steers and keep them moving at the front. And keep in mind, we didn't have cell phones, so we were all clear back at the top of the hill, a couple miles back, not knowing what was going on here. But we had to drive 700 head of yearling steers up through Volland here with no fences, and for some reason they just stayed in the middle of the road and went right in the yards.
By 1950, major changes were underway in both the cattle business and in our nation's transportation system. The railroads, which had once relied heavily on the revenue from the transportation of livestock, had found new business in hauling grain and manufactured goods. And with increasing federal regulations concerning the transportation of livestock, the railroads serving Wabaunsee County ceased hauling cattle by 1962. Wabaunsee County ranchers began hauling their cattle by truck to livestock exchanges in Manhattan and St. Mary's, Kansas, where weekly auctions were held. More significant than the loss of passenger train service to Volland in 1942 was the closing of the stockyards 20 years later. The loss of the stockyards meant a loss of business for the Kratzer store, and as a result, the town grew quiet.
So those are the memories that I have, mostly with the cattle driving. And this was a major cattle shipping point. And the other thing that caused the decline, I suppose, was the fact that we started shipping cattle by truck instead of train. But that was quite an experience living by a railroad that had steam engines and shipped cattle out of here.
While the cattle business and the railroad had sustained the economy of Volland, it was the Kratzer Brothers store that sustained the community. Not only did the store supply everything that a farm family would need, it was at the store where neighbors and friends gathered as a community.
I came to Volland in September of 1939. I was a new bride, and I was 19 years old. I lived here until September of 1981, when we moved into Alma. The store was a general store. You could buy most anything here. Anything for man, woman, or a child.
The store had always been the community gathering place from the time the Kratzers opened their first store in 1905. The evening hours offered ranchers and farmers an opportunity to interact socially after the day's work.
And being that close to this store, it became a major part of our life. As I said previously, it was open on Monday and Thursday night and Saturday nights. And we came here, I think, every Monday and Thursday night. My dad always quit work at 6 o'clock regardless. We didn't work late. And we came to the store and all the community was here.
Sometimes I took cases of eggs to the store and then just traded it out in groceries. Mabel usually waited on me, and I give her my list, and she wrote it down on a ticket, and then she went and got the groceries. And, I remember the sugar come in 10-pound bags instead of 4-pound bags like we get now. Coffee was in pound tins, or 3 pounds, and I looked on my coffee tin at home and it was 11 and some odd ounces, not a pound anymore.
Like all kids, I had a bicycle, and if I had any time, I'd spend it in Volland. I'd ride it to Volland. And I heard all of Otto Kratzer's stories. He just amazed me as a kid because he'd lived a lot of his dreams. He had rode a motorcycle to California.
When Ron was about a year old, he had scarlet fever, and we were quarantined for 6 weeks. The county health officer came out and put a big red sign on our door, said, "Quarantined, scarlet fever." Well, how was I going to get some groceries? So I called down to Volland and give them my order, and they put it up, and the mailman picked it up and brought it up to our mailbox, set it on the ground, and then Bill went out and got it and brought it to the house. So that's how we got our groceries. And then we got electricity somewhere around 47 or 48. And that really changed our lives. So then I think the first thing I bought was an electric iron. Bought the iron and a toaster and a mixer and I don't know what all kind of appliances. That was a real treat. I usually had some of the kids with me, and of course they got a treat out of being with Waldo. He liked kids, and they enjoyed being with Waldo. He was always on his tractor with his cart, going round and round the store.
While Kratzer continued to take still photographs of the ever-changing landscape of Volland, during the 1950s and early 1960s, Otto delighted in filming life at Volland with his movie camera.
So he filmed the molasses days. He also filmed my horses. And he'd get us up here to eat. That was his big thing, was the socializing. But when we came up here, it was a big deal when Otto invited us to eat in the dining room. I mean, like you got dressed to eat in the dining room upstairs. Otto would have his movie camera set up in the front room, which would be the side there toward the wooden steps there on the side away from the old store. And he'd get this film going, and you'd jump around on there, and then he'd run it backwards. And it's the first time I'd ever seen a horse run backward. And then forward, and then he'd, and it was all part of that evening's entertainment.
it was just a good fun time. We'd come down, as my mother said, on Monday and Thursday nights. And it appeared to me, the thing I remember most was the laughter. Everybody was happy. And unlike today that everybody's in a hurry, and it was a different way of life, but I thought people were really happy back then.
As the Volland store was once the foundation of Washington Township, now a century later, the Kratzer store brings the community together again. While the store opens a new page in its history, a ruin resurrected as an event center and gallery, the memories of Otto Kratzer and life at Volland remain clear.
In closing, I'm just happy to be here today, and I've been privileged to share some of my memories with everyone, and I'll enjoy listening to other people's memories. And to my way of thinking, those were just the good old days.